So welcome back, everybody. We are continuing in this very chapter Lamed Zayin. I believe this was the most classes on one chapter up till now. Excuse me. I believe that it's simply because of the length of the chapter. You see Lamed Zayin a bit longer than the rest. You can see in your textbooks in the original Tanya, the chapter begins at 92. Goes all the way to 98, and similarly the corresponding English text, which I encourage everybody to, those who you have the English text, to follow along. And we're holding on page in the original Tanya, the original text, it's Memtes, page Memtes, on the top, the third line of Masha Amar Azal, Shetal Materi Keneged Kulam. Made a bracha already, so we don't need to make a bracha. So I want to just mention, as I usually do, that to pick up on this very chapter and all the previous chapters, you could just put in the link box and the word Tanya, but or on the TanyaOnline.com, TanyaOnline.com website, which is hosted by the same honorable hosts, which we always continue to give them a big yeshikach. And but the advantage is this website is about the Tanya class, rather. It's only about on the Tanya, and namely the advantage of that you could follow along with the text and easy access to all the previous classes from the very beginning of the Tanya, again with the corresponding text. So we again begin in the third line of Mashkot Shomer Azal Shatal Materi Keneged Kulam. Dr. right away asks the question, how could you tell us, how could I tell you that, or the Torah demonstrate the virtue of mitzvah of tzedakah, as it's like the no other mitzvah, and it's like because of the advantage of the mitzvah of tzedakah over any other mitzvah. Now, based on what we learned last week, there's no point again to take the time and explain what Dr. Rebbe pointed out this very last week about the virtue or the enormity of the enormous energy which exists within the mitzvah of tzedakah, and for that reason the Chazal hifligu, which means they aggrandize this mitzvah, ma'id ma'id, a double expression of ma'id, in the advantage of tzedakah even over other mitzvahs. And it says, the Chazal say that if it weighs corresponding to all the other mitzvahs, and the entire Talmud Yerushalmi just called the mitzvah, when it says the mitzvah, it's referring to tzedakah, which shows this is the mitzvah. And the other mitzvah have to articulate what mitzvah it is, because this is the mitzvah, for the reason we spent before. And again, very briefly, we don't want to really take time, because the whole point of mitzvahs, which Hashem gave us, He wants us to transform the world, to elevate the world from its state, from its original state, the way Hashem originally created, and to connect it to a lakus, to godliness. And there's no other mitzvah that man invests all of himself, of his nefesh chayunis, nefesh bahamis, the vitalizing soul, which is again the animal soul, which usually receives its chayas from klipas nega, from that neutral klipa, and when it does the mitzvah, it gets involved. So there is a number of details of this, the implementation of the master plan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of making this world a dwelling place. There's obviously the mitzvah itself. It comes from wool, from the physicality of this very world, and it's transformed. Or it's the compartment which make tefillin, or it's a mezuzah, or a sefer Torah, and all this, as we mentioned time and again, the significant majority of our mitzvahs deal with the physical, as the point is to transform the physical. And we explained again the definition of transformation in this context: something receiving its life till then from the intermediary klipa, which is called klipas nega, as opposed to, and again receive its kedusha from its chayas, from energy from kedusha, maybe the mitzvah itself, or this, which gave me the encouragement, or gave me the ability to do the mitzvahs. The bread that I ate, and anything, if it's bread or it's vegetables, whatever I ate, which is again part and parcel of this physical world, that ultimately contributed to the actualization of this mitzvah, the implementation of this mitzvah, because I need the strength in order to do the mitzvah. It's also transformed, and ultimately the Alter Rebbe says the nefesh bahamis itself, the animal soul, the vitalizing soul, is also transformed till now it receives its chayas from the klipas nega. And now when it's invested in the mitzvah, tzedakah, it receives its chayes from kedusha, so there is transformation on that level as well. But when the Rebbe says how much of the nefesh hayunis is invested in any other mitzvah, a minimal, a part of the nefesh hayunis is invested in any other mitzvah. When it comes to tzedakah, the entire nefesh hayunis is invested in the mitzvah. Why? Because this is money which you put your whole entire soul, again, as we know, again, elaborated on this last week, and we're all identified with the energy that a person invests on the workplace, in his workplace, his or her workplace. It's the entire, so much of himself in order to bring a parnasa, bring a livelihood. And when you take part of that money, you give it to tzedakah, there's enormous transformation of your nefesh hayunis. Not that I've even added something, even money that doesn't come with the toil, that's an inheritance, but nonetheless, I could have used that money to something which would bring comfort and contribute to my nefesh hayunis, to my nefesh bahamis, to my soul, to my, again, the vitalizing soul, which would give me satisfaction. I take that and give it to tzedakah. I'm giving really part of myself. And again, with the whole explanation of the Alter Rebbe, again, we're just encapsulating it very brief, but you're more than welcome to go to the website and see it for yourself. But the Alter Rebbe says that from that comes out, again, this is this week's class, this is from what do we derive from this information of the last week's class? The mitzvah tzedakah, that is the quintessential mitzvah. That is the quintessential connection to HaKadosh. With that, you're fulfilling the mitzvah, the quintessential mitzvah, which implements Hashem's master plan in transforming this world to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to a home for Hashem. And meaning to say that it's, as they say, shokol kineg lashon in the Razal, our sages of blessed memory, shokol kineg kol mitzvahs, meaning you put all the mitzvahs on one part of the scale, you put a mitzvah stuck on the other part of the scale, based on everything we explained, it weighs it down. But then we know in another plane that would apparently include also Talmud Torah, the mitzvah of learning Torah. And then yet we know that the same Chazal, the same sages of blessed memory tell us that Talmud Torah kineg kol, that the greatest mitzvah of all is the mitzvah of learning Torah. The idea of learning Torah even greater than any mitzvah. So how do you reconcile the two? Is it the mitzvah tzedakah or is it the mitzvah of Talmud Torah? Again, this is something which we say every single morning in the famous mission of the Talmud Torah. Kineged kol, we know there's nothing overrides Talmud Torah, which means by definition of its mitzvah, as Alter himself explains in a few places of Tanya, starting from Hey, Gimel, the 37th chapter, in the end of this very chapter. Now the virtue of mitzvah of Talmud Torah even over any other mitzvah, excuse me, and again based on this Talmud Torah Kineged Kol, so how do you reconcile the two? It's mitzvah tzedakah or it's Talmud Torah. And this is what we learn inside now. Ma'asham Razal Talmud Torah Kineged Kol. That Talmud Torah corresponds to all the mitzvahs. I mean to say the Talmud Torah, the virtue of learning Torah, overrides over all the other mitzvahs. The answer is Mipnei Talmud Torah b'dibur u'machshava shehim levushim ha'pnimim shel nefesh hayunis. The reconciliation is like this. It depends what you're dealing with. For example, and the Alter Rebbe gives 2 points over here where you see the virtue of learning Torah over any other mitzvah. And from that perspective and point of view, it says Talmud Torah Kineged Kol, Talmud Torah is learning Torah is the greatest mitzvah of all. Nor is the greatest expression, it's the greatest union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu could come precisely through learning Torah, as opposed to even in comparison to any other mitzvah, including the mitzvah of tzedakah. And then the other places where it says and that tzedakah weighs over all the other mitzvahs, including Talmud Torah. So Alter Rebbe puts it again, explains this two points over here. But let's start with the notion when we say something is shokol or something is a greater mitzvah. We have a Mishnah, similar Mishnah. The Mishnah says that one moment of satisfaction in the world to come is greater than all the satisfactions a person can have in this very physical world. Now, nobody really, I don't think there ever existed, a person should go through life, we mentioned this in the past, without bumps at all, 120 years, or beyond that, only pleasure and satisfaction. It probably didn't exist till now, Mashiach will come, as Hashem, it will exist, perhaps be the prevalent, the common. But let's say, theoretically, that someone would be able to have a whole life full of pleasures and delicacies and delights, and is invested in his worldly, as a result of his investment in worldly matters, delicacies and delights. In the Olam Hazeh, the Mishnah says 1 moment of satisfaction in the world to come is a greater satisfaction than all the entire life of satisfactions in this world. Same Mishnah. It says, greater is the virtue of tshuva ma'asim tovim, repentance and good deeds in this world, than the entire world to come. Meaning to say, the yidel who does, puts on tefillin one moment, one time in this world, is greater than the entire experience of the world to come, including the experience of Moshe Rabbeinu, if you will. He's experiencing 3,000 years in Gan Eden, but it's still part of the Elam Haba, it's still part of the experience of Gan Eden, and one mitzvah, ma'asim tovim Elam Hazeh, is greater than the entire Elam Haba. The entire Elam Haba, it doesn't give any limitation. Say 1,000 years of Elam Haba as opposed to 2,000 or 1,001. The entire Elam Haba. So repentance and a good deed in this world is greater than the entire world to come. So apparently on the surface it seems to contradict the first part of the mission, the second part of the mission. But we know it's not a contradiction because it depends what you're talking about. You're talking about the pleasure of the neshama. Obviously, how could you compare the pleasure of the neshama, the world to come, which is when it's divested from body with all its limitations and confinements, which are associated with body and nefesh bahamis, an animal soul, which the nefesh is invested in. And then it's connected to the Mekayr Kol Tahanug, to the source of all pleasures. Any pleasure we could have in this world, this is already the extension or the last and the lowest, most lower levels of where Tainug, where the notion of Tainug pleasure is experienced. But when you're dealing with Hashem, the revelation which exists in Gan Eden, there is an offspring. There is a radiation of the Mekayr Kol Tanug, the source of all pleasures, which is the Kodesh Baruch Hu Himself. And obviously, there's different levels of Gan Eden itself. How much Tainug the neshama experience, but there's no comparison. Tainug with the neshama, a person can live 1,000 years in this physical world with all the tanugim, with all the pleasures and delights and delicacies, doesn't come to experience of the source of all tanugim. Hashem exposes Himself in Gan Eden, which Hashem is the source. The fact that you could have pleasure in this world, it comes from somewhere. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It has a source, and this has a source, and it has a source in higher and higher until Gan Eden, which is again an expression of the Mekayr, of the part of the source of Tainug, of the pleasure, which is again anchored and sourced and rooted in Hashem. Hashem exposes Himself in Gan Eden, so there you have not just a result or a derivative of the Tainug, the way it's in its roots and its source, is just a tiny bit of it. So it doesn't matter if it spans 1,000 years or 2,000 years, as opposed to Gan Eden. The neshama has one moment, it's connected to Mekayr Kol Tanug, literally pleasure. Pleasure, we can understand what pleasure is all about. This is a connection to the source of all pleasures. Again, there's different levels within Gan Eden itself. No, Gan Eden Atach, Gan Eden Elyon, and in there's so many different levels. Right? So there, obviously, you're talking about the Tainug of the Nivra, the Tainug of the neshama. No, there's no comparison. The second part of the mission tells us where is the Tainug BAYT, the Tainug of the Creator, not the Tainug of creation. Again, we had this in the past, but just repeating, just to see the immediate reconciliation. Hashem, though, where's the core essence of Hashem is where He decided to be. And He had a master plan. He wanted a physical world, Tachtainim, the lowly world, not Gan Eden, not an Olam Ha'elyon, but Olam Hazeh, in this physical world to be transformed to Elokus, to godliness. So this is where is Taiva Nis'ave Lashon in Medrash Tanchum Nis'ave Kodesh Baruch Hu Lisli B'Dir B'Tachtim Hashem, just not thought about it, but He desired His core essence. Like you desire something, you're all involved. Your core essence is involved. Where's Hashem's core essence? It's in this physical world. That's why He created everything, including the Gan Eden, which is a reward for the neshama for all its effort it did in this world. So where's the Tainug BAYT? Not the Tainug of the Nivra, the Tainug of the Creator in this physical world. Tshuva ma'asim tovim Elam Hazeh. One moment, put on tefillin. That's what the Eibishter is. And the core is said not a radiation of the Eibishter. Ziv Hashchina, like we say in Gan Eden. It's neni mi Ziv Hashchina. They have a pleasure from the ray of the Shechina, not the core essence of the Shechina. As opposed to the core essence of as opposed to this physical world, you have the core essence of the Shechina itself, because that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu Nis'ave, He created everything, including the Gan Eden, in order to have a dwelling place in this physical world. So this is where His core essence is. That's why He created everything. So when you put on tefillin, you're connecting to the Tainug BAYT, or there, what's transpiring is as a Tainug, as a pleasure of the Creator, not just the pleasure of the creation of a created entity and being. Which that's again the obvious reconciliation of those two Mishnahs. But what Al Tareb is saying over here, it's when similarly, again, it doesn't say this right over here, but similarly, when you see one place it says the mitzvah tzedakah is the mitzvah greater than all the mitzvahs, which includes Talmud Torah, and then another place it says Talmud Torah keneged kulam, it doesn't mean that's how it is across the board. There is the virtue, and from the perspective of Hashem's master plan, implementing Hashem's master plan and transforming this very physical world to Hashem. Obviously, tzedakah overrides every other mitzvah, including learning Torah. Because tzedakah is where your action is. Tzedakah, you're giving of yourself, your whole self, like we again explained very briefly in the beginning of this very class and elaborated in the last week's class, that you're putting your entire nefesh chayunos, and there's so much of this physical world, again, this which is connected to the klipas nega, is transformed when you give your money away to tzedakah. So in the context of the master plan, obviously, there's no comparison to tzedakah for the reason, again, of this which was explained in the last week's class. But when you're dealing with the limud Torah, obviously there's a virtue of limud Torah over mitzvahs maisis, over mitzvahs tzedakah, because limud Torah deals with the more refined parts of my nefesh. From that perspective, there's no comparison to learning Torah. Rather, from that perspective, it says Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, including all mitzvahs and including the mitzvah tzedakah. Because from the perspective of the virtue of limud Torah, the fact that, again, for the two different messages that Al is saying over here, one, again, he mentioned in Chaper Chav Gimel already, but he repeats it over here, but it starts with the point that Talmud Torah deals with the more inner garments, the more refined parts of my nefesh. Tzedakah is action. Take a pen, write the check of $1 million and give it away. There's devotion. There is a commitment. There is submission. There's subordinates to the master plan, giving it away, taking $1 million and giving it away. I've done something very grand in implementing Hashem's the master plan of Hashem. Again, and based on all the explanations in this chapter. But there's nothing that I don't invest in on my thought. Yes, I make a decision, but my thought, my intellectuality, my intellect is not invested, which is again more the refined part of the person's neshama. My speech, which is again the gift of man over any other created entities within creation. Well, Meiser Ha'adam is the fact that he's able to speak, which these two thoughts, intellect and speech, is invested in the learning Torah when he takes a Gemara or any other sefer of Torah and learns. So from that perspective and point of view, the Gemara is telling us, there you're investing your more refined part of you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and connecting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As opposed to any other mitzvah, because it's done with the most external manner. Maybe if I put on film, maybe if I write a check, maybe even if $1 million, it's action as opposed to dibur machshava, thought and speech. And from that perspective, we say the Talmud Torah is Keneged Kulam. So, not to get mixed up, the reason I brought that mission is just to see that one hand, the same Mishnah could say, this is the greatest, and there's no comparison to that, and then Mishnah would say, kind of a different message, but yes, there's a reconciliation. This is what I'm giving that, just the reason, that's the only reason I'm bringing that example, just to show you, yes, it's not a contradiction, it depends from what virtuous perspective you're coming from. If it's from the fulfilling the master plan, well, obviously there's no comparison to tzedakah. Again, this which we explained in this past week. But when it comes to the advantage of Talmud Torah, for what Talmud Torah stands for, the fact that Talmud Torah you invest the inner garments, which is dibur machshava, thought and speech, how could you compare? So let's see it inside. Now that, again, as we mentioned, Alter Rebbe brings about another point of view, and again another advantage and virtue of learning Torah over Kima Mitzvahs, but let's start with the first one. So the first one, it's, again, we have the three garments, speech, thought, speech, and action. Mitzvahs, all mitzvahs, including mitzvahs of tzedakah, I'm invested in the most inferior one, which is action. The Talmud Torah is with speech and thought, which is the inner garments of the animal soul, of the vitalizing soul, as we explained time and again. The gift of speech is attributed to man. An animal could also do, he could push, he could pull. Maybe his action is even more powerful than the action of man. So action, there's no comparison, the action of man to action of animal. But what is? It's still chitzoniyut. It's still the external garment in comparison to speech and thought. Now, for that matter, it's obvious that speech is also external in comparison to thought. Thought is the way I'm for myself, by myself. Speech is the way I relate to another party, external as opposed to something which remains internal, which is my thought. But when you contrast speech and dibur machshava, you compare speech and dibur machshava, obviously dibur machshava, thought and speech, are called the vushmapim, the inner garments, as opposed to action. V'gam, another advantage over here, in the end of the day, you could say it's even three, the virtues of Talmud Torah over to keep my mitzvahs. And here the Alter Rebbe right away says, Muhus matzmus shebchenes chabad miklipas negish whenever chrinus nichlos biktushim mamosh gesha isik b'teira be'iyun v'seichel. He said there's another advantage. The individual can give a perfect class in a certain area in Yiddishkeit, or a certain area in behavior between man and his fellow friend. Does that mean that, and with all the sources, and you come out, wow, this is a light which just turned on, like a light bulb turned on in my mind. What a clear class, and what a clear, what clarity he brought to this and this subject, and so on. Does that mean that the individual giving the class became the perfect person? That his heart was again aligned with everything he understood and he was able to even convey? Not at all. Because there could be conviction on an intellectual level, but not necessarily the heart is following along. Most of us are convinced in all the good stuff. Yeah, there's Hashem, Hashem, and we have to love Hashem, we have to do His mitzvahs, but is the heart completely aligned with that whole thought process, the whole structure of Hashem Echad, Halavai, even the Beinani, which is the perfect Yid, never out of line in thought, speech, and action, is also struggles. Struggles meaning to say he's never aligned, he never violates, because if he violates even once, even not only in action, but even not only in speech, but even in thought, he's already called the Rosh Hashanah Beinani. He's not perfectly good, and he struggles because the heart, what the mind is convinced, not necessarily the heart follows along. So the heart pumps or sends signals in different types of signals which he has to drive out or overcome, and so on. That's the life of the Beinani. So there is the conviction of the mind not necessarily reflects the conviction or the expression of the heart. The mind could be 100% convinced, the heart could have its struggles and challenges, as we all know it. So and this is the advantage of learning Torah over any other mitzvah. When you do a mitzvah, when you do mitzvahs maisias, you're doing what you have to do. When you learn Torah, there is a connection, because it's a connection. Not only because, like we just said a moment before, because it's dealing with my inner garments, my machshava, my thought and speech, but more so because Torah is about intellectually connecting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, utilizing my intellectual faculties in my learning Torah. And at the moment that I learn Torah, I'm connected in an absolute manner. I mean to say, when I learn Torah, because intellectually my intellect can capture a thought. It could have a perfect understanding on any subject and be convinced of that subject which it invested in, as opposed later when it has to reflect in heart, then the heart and the life, namely the life of the Beinani, it's always challenged with the other messages of coming from the Rosh Hashanah. So the advantage of learning Torah is that because it's an intellectual investment, so intellectually you have an absolute connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Intellectually there's an absolute conviction on this which you're learning. That's a great advantage. So when you're learning Torah, you're on that level. You're connected with some type of with an absolute connection to the information that you're learning. As opposed to when you do a mitzvah, you're just doing what you have to do. Obviously, there's the advantage of doing mitzvahs, especially the mitzvah tzedakah. Again, we're not taking away from all this, which is accomplished precisely through doing mitzvahs. Any mitzvah, for that matter, even in the face of Talmud Torah, right? When you stop learning Torah to put on tefillin in the end of the day. The mitzvah, the Gemara says, what you can't do through someone else, you have to stop doing that mitzvah. The Alter Rebbe is going to point this Gemara out later. You have to stop learning Torah rather than do the mitzvah. And why so? Because will always remain the advantage of mitzvahs over learning Torah. Because mitzvahs, again, you're involving the lowest garment, which is the garment of Maisa, and that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. Dira b'tachtenim, a dwelling place in this very physical world, and not only in the physical world, but the lowest expression of man, which is action in comparison to speech and thought, should also be transformed, or namely to be transformed to kedusha, to holiness, to divinity. So there's the advantage of Maisa because it's the tachtun within myself. Between all three garments, thought, speech, and action. It's the tachtun, and that's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu's master plan is invested in the tachtun on all levels. Within me, within the system of man as well, the Maisa, my action, and more than that, my action actually does the mitzvah, puts on the tefillin. Learning about tefillin doesn't get the tefillin on my hand. I'm not doing it the mitzvah. I have to make a separate decision to actually put on the tefillin. So obviously there's all the advantages, even when we point out the advantage of learning Torah, the advantages of learning Torah over mitzvahs. The advantages of mitzvahs always remain, but yet there's something very special about the learning, the fact that you're intellectually, it's an intellectual investment that I'm convinced, and therefore the connection is on absolute terms, and again the conviction is in absolute terms. And that's what the Alter Rebbe says. The essence of the Chabad, of the wisdom, the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, meaning say the faculty of the nefesh, the intellectual faculties of the nefesh hayunis, at that moment when you learn Torah, is completely consumed into the world of divinity. Meaning to say, when I'm learning the Torah, and someone asks me, "Is this? Tell me pshat." I can tell pshat. There's nothing within me which is struggling to convey the pshat intellectually. So what's happening? And first of all, the conviction within myself, and to convey it to others, there's no challenge. Meaning to say, the counterpart, again, because what do I gain that the conviction is absolute? That the counterpart, meaning to say the intellectual faculties of my animal soul, which again we know that this is the struggle between the animal soul, with all its 10 faculties, the struggle with the nefesh elikis, with the godly soul, with all its 10 faculties. And the point is that nefesh elikis should take over the whole system. And the system should be just a conduit to the messages of the nefesh elikis. Maybe heart, maybe action, maybe speech, and so on. Right? There's two entities fighting over the body. Body being the container, that this should only contain the message of the nefesh elikis. So it's on all levels. Yeah, but at other levels, for example, when it comes to heart, the nefesh elikis could shoot its signal, but nefesh bahamis is, as we all know, it's shooting its own signal. Yet when it comes to the intellectual investment, when my mind understands that piece of Gemara, there's nothing telling me differently. And if something's telling me differently, meaning say that I didn't thoroughly understand it, I'll get involved even deeper into the information that I'm learning, and eventually someone tells me, could you tell me pshat? Yes. Are you convinced of the pshat? Yes, I know it thoroughly. What's happening to the intellectual faculties of the Nefesh Bahamis? They're completely laid to rest, meaning they're completely transformed. They're experiencing that experience of the Nefesh Elikis, the Torah of the Nefesh, which the Nefesh Elikis has invested in the time that it learns Torah. It's not struggling, it's not fighting. It completely stands in complete subordinance to the faculties of the Nefesh Elikis, to the three intellectual faculties of the Nefesh Elikis, the Chacham Bina Das, the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And that's the advantage of learning the Torah. As opposed to when it comes to heart, as we know, it's only in the time of davening that there's certain moments within the davening when the person is really involved, when his heart is on fire with Avos Hashem, then the Ava of the Nefesh Bahamis is laid to rest, at least for the moments that the person davens. But the moment he finishes davening, or even until he gets there, the Nefesh Bahamis always sends its own signals. In other words, the heart level, the Nefesh Bahamis is not necessarily transformed. That's only by the tzaddik, as you remember, the difference of the tzaddik and the beinoni. It's about the heart. Where is the heart? Is it completely transformed or not completely transformed? In a beinoni, we all know it very well. Even if we would be the beinoni, and the heart is not transformed, for it constantly sends its signals, its animalistic representations, and we got to always fight it off, etc. But on an intellectual level, the fact that I can understand this thoroughly, the Gemara or the any part of Torah that I'm learning, and there is no challenge at the time. Maybe there's a challenge of the heart telling me, stop learning, take it easy, and so on. Read something else, and so on. But on an intellectual level, because I understand the Torah that I'm learning thoroughly, there's a complete submission of the Nefesh Bahamis, the corresponding faculties of the Nefesh Bahamis, which is its thought, speech, its wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, is Chacham Bina Das, completely transformed and part of the experience of the intellectual faculties of my Nefesh Elikis, of my godly soul, which is its Chacham Bina Das, its wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and that's the advantage of Limud Torah, even over any other mitzvah. When one occupies himself with Torah, with depth and with his intellect. even in the same time, we're dealing with the Beinani on the heart level when it comes to the midas, the emotional faculties, chesed, gvura, tiferes, which is dealing with love, fear. Tiferes is mercy. Again, which is love is associated with chesed. Kindness, gvura is severity, discipline, which is associated with yira. Tiferes is mercy, which is again beauty, which is a combination of the two. As we know of the midas, of the attributes, again, not only of the nefesh elokis and the nefesh bahamis, which is the human emotional faculties. Even at the same time, when I'm learning Torah, the emotional faculties are not transformed. The Beinanim cannot completely transform to the Kedusha, as we all know it. The heart could send a beautiful godly signal, but it's countered with another animalistic signal. We always have to override it because again, as opposed to when I learn something thoroughly, there's the absolute conviction. So you have the complete submission and transformation of my animalistic intellectual, the intellectual faculties of my animalistic soul. And stuff. The Rebbe concludes this part and says, why so? Why is it taka so that when it comes to heart, there can't be the complete transformation by a Beinani? It's supposed to be tzaddik, right? By the tzaddik, there is. That's what makes him a tzaddik. By the Beinani, is not. The Rebbe says over here something he did never introduce so clearly till now, but he says very clearly, and it's brought in a number of places. The evil, the force of evil, is more potent in midas, which means when it comes to the emotional faculties, more than the intellectual faculties. That's known to those who know the Chachma Nichain is Chachma Nistora. It's abbreviation Yodei Chen. Those who know the Chachma Nistora, the hidden esoteric part of Torah. As you learn in Zayir, you know the Midas receive energy much from a higher source than the Chabad, than the wisdom, understanding, knowledge, meaning the intellectual faculties. And the Chiddush is because we know Chabad, it's often brought in the third chapter, and it becomes very obvious that between the 10 spheres, Chacham Bina Das comes first. They are the first of the 10 spherot, and then come the midot, the emotional faculties of Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Yisod, Malchus. And not only that, again, as it makes so much sense, as the Alter Rebbe again points this out in the third chapter, and it becomes so obvious that what produces an emotional expression or an emotional an emotion, an attribute, obviously is seichel. Seichel is called avaim. Chacham Bina is called mother and father and mother, which produce the tolders, the children, the offsprings, which is midas. And again, without using any terms over here for as avaim or offsprings, we know that this which you thoroughly understand, this is what you develop a feeling to. If you thoroughly understand the virtue of something, if it's a product, you automatically gravitated, you want to connect to it, etc. And if you understand something, that this is something that you have to stay away from, or you understand that there should be an expression, this person is very great, that will immediately arouse within you an expression of fear, or better yet said, or better, of reverence towards that person. Mind is what ultimately establishes feeling. It's my intellectual investment. When I understand something thoroughly, that ultimately produces an emotional expression, an attribute, depending what I ponder on and what I invest my mind in, what kind of midah it's going to produce, what kind of attribute it's going to produce, to gravitate to it, like love it, or stay away from it, or express fear or reverence of it. So again, not only in the Seder Shtalshalos and the Sfiras, like it's brought multiple places, everything starts with Chochmah Bina Das, and then the Midot Chesed Gvura Tiferes Netzach Yisod Malchus. But we understand it as well. We could appreciate Chabad is what produces a midah. You understand something thoroughly, that produces the feeling, and again, depending what the investment, the intellectual investment, what kind of feeling it's going to arouse, evoke, or produce. But yet, it does say, so one would say, well, if I could transform my intellect, which is again deeper part, a higher part within my soul, complete transformation, absolute conviction when I learn Torah. So what about the heart, which is inferior, which is lower? Why, there for sure should be the ability to transform my heart, and we all know it. This is the life of the BAYT, and this is, again, which is our mandate. We all know it. You can't just say, heart, love Hashem, and that's it. For the rest of the day, I just love Hashem, and all the other stuff which is not aligned with Hashem, I can't stand, I'm disgusted with, I abhor it. No, we know it's not true. We shouldn't fool ourselves even for a moment to say, no, I don't like that. You perhaps gravitate to it. And in fact, you have to pull yourself away from it. Maybe your eyes, your ears, your thoughts, that means you're gravitated to it. It means, do you certainly have an Avraham, and it's definitely sending other signals. You don't allow those signals to enter, to trespass into thought, speech, and action. That's what makes you a BAYT and not Chas v'Shalom a Rasha. But the signals are coming, and the question is, if the deeper part of my nefesh I could transform, or the experience of learning Torah is a total transformation of my intellectual faculties. No, the intellectual faculties of Avraham is towards the intellectual faculties, a complete submission to the intellectual faculties of my nefesh alikis, and again in the experience of learning Torah. An absolute conviction. Why shouldn't it be so on a lower level of my nefesh? Apparently it should for sure be so, but it's not so, as we all know it. On heart levels, there's no real transformation, to the exclusion of the tzaddik, obviously. The Alter Rebbe says, as it's known, it's written, it's brought, and again, those who are acquainted know the Chachma Nistar, the esoteric part of Torah. It says there that the Yanika, the nourishment of the Midas, rather the Midas, nourish from a deeper level within Kedusha, which is again the source of all vitality, the source of all force, the source of all energy, which is again Kedusha. The heart nourishes much more than mind does. And because heart nourishes much more energy from the source of all energy, which is again Kedusha, therefore the Nefesh Bahamis, which is, it equally nourishes, again, together with the Nefesh Alikis, the Nefesh Bahamis, which nourishes this extra energy more than the Chabad, more than the Chachma Bina Das, more than the intellectual faculties. And because it nourishes more, it has more strength. It has more, because it has, again, more energy, has more strength, and it has more determination not to succumb to the experience of its counterpart. Again, the Nefesh Bahamis to Nefesh Alikis, and vice versa. Nefesh Bahamis by a BAYT Chas v'Shalom cannot just come take over and say, look, and gravitate to all this Elam Haza for whatever it stands for. Naturally, we're dealing with Elam Haza, anything which is not aligned with the way Hashem wants us to engage with this very physical world. The animalistic inclinations and desires and so on. Nefesh Bahamis can't take over there also, because Nefesh Alikis will always pump its signals or send its signals in the context of loving Hashem, especially when it comes with a very healthy, structured perception of the oneness of Hashem, which that itself arouses and produces a fiery love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And yet, conversely, it also, because of the midas, even of Shebaham, because it nourishes more from the source of energy, it doesn't succumb. It doesn't stand in complete subordination. It always, despite the BAYT could have a fiery love to Hashem, which is namely the time of davening, or even a bit at other times, perhaps much less, significantly less than the time of davening, when the whole heart could be completely full of Avas Hashem, as opposed to other times. But yet, the Nefesh Bahamis will always kick in and send its signal, even to this BAYT, which even experience beautiful davening, or even certain times he has a feeling, a strong feeling, which is to Hashem, which is coming naturally from the Nefesh Alikis, but it always sends its signals. It's never willing to succumb, to stand in complete submission to the godly signal, the godly heart expression, because it draws more from the source of energy, more than the Chabad, which is again the intellectual, the level of in the intellectual faculties of both sides of Shalikis and the Nefesh Bahamis. So therefore there could be a complete submission and transformation in the time when a person learns Torah, as opposed to when it comes to heart. As we all know it, the heart always will never give up. Not the Nefesh Shalikis for the Nefesh Bahamis, and unfortunately not vice versa. because it completely, because it carries a certain energy with the Chabad does not carry. And because of that energy, it has a state, it has a sense of determination, never to give in, never to succumb. So this is the reason for it. But to keep it in the context of what the Alter Rebbe is trying to convey over here. So when I do learn Torah, the entire nefesh, the intellectual faculty of the Avraham stands a complete submission, again, because it doesn't nourish the nourishment is not so potent and strong. So therefore it does, when a person learns Torah, he's convinced on the information that he learns. Maybe Pnimius HaTorah and the Hashem Echad, he can give a good class, and why can he give a good class? He's not faking it. It's because intellectually he's completely convinced, which means that Nefesh Bahami stands complete subordinance to the message of the Nefesh Elikis of the godly soul. And that's the virtue of learning Torah over any other mitzvah. So again, first it's the more refined part of the person, the inner garments, of the first thing the Alter Rebbe says, and then the Alter Rebbe says the complete transformation exists precisely when I learn Torah as opposed to when I do a mitzvah. There's no transformation as when I'm doing mitzvah. Again, when I'm doing the mitzvah, it's not that there's anything of me which is completely transformed. Certainly I'm doing my hands, I'm not doing an Aveda, nor sitting idle. It's doing a mitzvah, but on soul levels, which again, the nefesh itself is the 10 faculties, Chacham Bina Das, not the garment. The Chacham Bina Das, the Midas, which is Chesed Gvura Tiferet Netzach Yisod Malchus. There's no transformation. As opposed to when I learn Torah, my intellectual faculties are completely, again, the animal soul is completely transformed to the information that I'm learning, again, via the Torah that I'm learning, which again, the information I'm learning via the investment of the Chabad, the Chacham Bina Das, of the Nefesh Elikis of the godly soul. So we will stop over here, even though I was ready and looking forward to go on to the third advantage of Limud Torah, learning Torah, over doing mitzvahs. But we reached the time where we pretty much should stop at this very point over here at the 2 dots. So we'll look forward explaining this later. But what we gain over here is just to understand there's no contradiction. It's an easy reconciliation, or that Alter Rebbe reconciles. It depends where you're coming from. You're talking about the master plan. Why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world to be transformed to a godly world, a divine world. Obviously, there's no comparison. In general, mitzvahs carry that virtue over learning Torah, because at that point you're involved in the actual transformation as opposed to just knowing the information. And within the mitzvahs, there's no greater mitzvah than the mitzvah of tzedakah for the entire explanation, how it fits and how it's aligned with that. Actually, with fulfilling, bringing Hashem's master plan into fruition. There's no comparison to the mitzvah of tzedakah. That includes all the mitzvahs, and obviously Talmud Torah, learning Torah. Yet, in other places, where our sages of blessed memory say that Talmud Torah can get called learning Torah. There's an advantage of learning Torah over any other mitzvah. It's from a different perspective and point of view, for the reasons the Alter Rebbe just pointed out. Number one, and again, because it's the inner garments, the more refined part of the person, refined garments are transformed, and the second, that there's a complete transformation of the Chabad, which means the intellectual faculties of the Nefesh Bahamis, to the intellectual faculties, which means to the air, to the light, to the energy which comes by the intellectual faculties of the godly soul, and the godly soul is involved in his learning Torah. Have a wonderful evening.